But I saw Deborah at work when I first moved here about 26 years ago. And it was at an elementary school, and all these little kids were gathered together in this room. And there were lots of them, and they were sitting on the floor, and they were so excited. And here was Deborah with her hat, and a box full of books, and she was passing out these books just like crazy. And I said, how is it that the school can afford to give away books to all these children? Well, eventually I did find out. I later found out that it was a program called RIF, R-I-F. I definitely was impressed, especially when I discovered that the school eventually distributed over 50,000 books in a 15-year period, right through RIF, this program. A few years later, I was up at this high school, and I was substituting for a coach who had been in a bad car wreck. And I was substituting for a 9th grade class, and it was an honors class. And these were the smartest kids, and they just, they were very casual about assignments. And I thought, I'm going to give them some essay assignments. And that's hard in 9th grade. But boy, did they come through shining. And this one girl named Betty, she wrote a beautiful essay. And it had very critical analysis in it, and I was just shocked when I read it. And I thought, I hope that she's able to get an education, and it'll stick with her, and she can be successful, because I know she could be. Well, it was maybe a couple of years later, I was up there, and I was subbing. Come on in. Beth, just grab your seat anywhere. I was subbing again, and I happened to sub in the same honors class. They kind of follow each other every year. These honors class went through the same experiences. And I said, where's Betty, the young woman I was talking about? They said, well, she had a baby, and she had to drop out of school. I said, oh, God, that just made me sick. But eventually, I found out that she was able to overcome this, and I'll tell you about it. A few years later, I was at a gathering in an education building at Cuero ISD. Deborah was leading a talk to numerous students. As it turns out, she was talking to dropout students who she was guiding to become reinstated and continue their education. In the audience, I spotted Betty. I said, oh, Betty, that's great, I see you. And I approached her later, and we began to catch up. Betty said she was married, had 2 young children, but she was so grateful to the program that Deborah started to help out the dropout students like her, especially those who were mothers who needed child care and were able to take advantage of this program. Hallelujah, I thought. I soon discovered that this was from a grant, and eventually became, was it the PET program? Okay. So, then a year or 2 later, down the road, I was hosting a reception for Ruben Hinojosa. He was our congressman before this one, and he loved to tell the story about Deborah. He said that she came to D.C., and she came in his office to meet him, and she said, Congressman, I want some grants. And he said, you want what? She said, I want some grants. And he says, well, Miss Baros, there's a way you got to go through this. You got to, excuse me, you've got to apply for it. She says, well, please put me with someone that can tell me how to do it, and I'm going to get some grants for Cuero Independent School District. And so some of those accomplishments on the back are what Deborah is responsible for. Deborah told me she still makes goals and accomplishes them. And one way was recently, as you see, her new adventure writing this book. And it's about her dad who died a few years ago. So in between going from one house to another house she has across country, she wrote this book. So I hope she'll tell us about it because it looks so neat. It's called Grandpa Epi and the Circle of Life. He apparently had a big influence on her life. Well, I have a sociological background, and family history or family studies was part of my education. And a light bulb went on in my head. I said, boy, this is an example of how fathers influence daughters. So I went to my computer and tacked it in, looked in fathers and daughters. Well, there was study after study after study that showed the examples of how important a relationship is between fathers and daughters. This one article caught my eye, and it was called Daughters